Remember when Ubisoft announced the first ever quadruple A game? It was supposed to be their next big live service. A game that would change how we see and play live service games. Okay, that part was made up, but it sounds like something Ubisoft would say. Well, it's 2 years later, and I finally decided to try Skull and Bones. This game was announced over a decade ago, delayed multiple times, and somehow became one of the most controversial Ubisoft games ever made. Which is one of Ubisoft's strongest assets, the marketing department, since no one would know or play this game if it wasn't for the quadruple A narrative. And after hearing people call it everything from the next pirate MMO to a complete disaster, I finally played Skull and Bones for the first time. And well, the game was on sale for around $2, so why not? So, is Skull and Bones actually terrible? Or did the internet overreact like it usually does? But first, I think it's important to take a holistic view of Skull and Bones, starting from the beginning. Believe it or not, the premise of Skull and Bones wasn't based on Sea of Thieves, but it dates back all the way to 2013, when Assassin's Creed Black Flag inadvertently proved that players didn't just want to be assassins, they liked the idea of being pirates. And we can all agree that the naval combat was the strongest part of that game. So when Ubisoft announced Skull and Bones in 2017, the pitch seemed like a no-brainer to me. Take the naval combat, build around it, make the game look more up-to-date, and make it multiplayer so a group of players can manage the ship. Instead of a refined spiritual successor, the project became a textbook case study in directionless development, sunk cost fallacy, and the dangers of chasing live service trends. The core reason Skull and Bones spent over a decade in development is that its leadership could never agree on its identity. The project underwent multiple complete reboots, shifting from a multiplayer arena shooter to an open-world survival game, and finally to a live service resource grinder. So, back in 2013, development began for Project Black Flag Infinite as an expansion of Assassin's Creed 4. Then it morphs into an MMO spin-off, before finally becoming a standalone IP. In 2017, Ubisoft officially announces the game with a 2018 release window, showcasing a 5v5 multiplayer arena mode that focuses heavily on tactical ship versus ship combat. Then, between 2018 and 2020, the game was delayed multiple times. There was internal leadership clashes over the direction. The scope shifted away from arena combat towards an open world, shared universe model inspired by survival mechanics. And then, between 2021 and 2023, another massive overhaul occurred. The game adopted a live service structure, focusing heavily on resource gathering, crafting, and seasonal content, even after suffering continuous delays and closed beta feedback that highlighted a lack of depth. And finally, in February 2024, the game officially launches. Almost 11 years after the initial development began, to deeply mixed reviews and an immediate drop in player counts. So, this timeline, as you look at it, you can tell it was following the trend. Back in 2013, they wanted to release a DLC for Assassin's Creed, and then it shifted to a MMO. MMO was still popping at this point. I think around this time period, World of Warcraft was reaching its peak. And then in 2017, they shifted to the 5v5 arena mode. If I'm not mistaken, this was when Overwatch was at its peak. I could be wrong, but I feel like it was around this time Overwatch was at its peak. And then 2018 to 2020, this is around the time where survival games was popping. You know, like Ark Survival and all those survival type games, which ironically enough, Windrose adopted. And then in 2021-2023, we're in this live service era of gaming. and everyone wants to do a live service. And so, well, Ubisoft is doing their live service thing. And finally, 2024, we have this live service game, and well, yeah, the rest is history. So, after all of this, a question I had was, if Skull and Bones was such a troubled project, why didn't Ubisoft just cancel it? They have a history of cutting their losses on struggling IPs, but this game was unique apparently. It was legally mandated to be released. So, some deep lore, development was primarily led by Ubisoft Singapore. Early in the project's life, the studio secured generous subsidies and grants from the Singaporean government to build an original blockbuster IP in the region. The catch was that these government agreements came with strict stipulations. Ubisoft was legally obligated to deliver and release the game, or risk having to pay back millions in subsidies and face a massive hit to the studio's regional operation. This created a zombie project scenario. They couldn't kill the game, so they had to keep funding it until it resembled a reasonable product. And by the time it launched, reports indicated the development budget had bloated to roughly $200 million. The sheer length of the development cycle meant the studio was essentially paying for the creation of 3 different games, only to scrap the first 2. So, to justify the steep $70 entry price for a game that heavily featured microtransactions and a seasonal battle pass, Ubisoft CEO Guillemot famously defended it to investors by calling it a quadruple A game. This label immediately backfired. It became a gaming meme that critics and players used as a metacritic against the game's evident shortcomings, cementing the narrative of an out-of-touch corporate leadership trying to spin a development disaster. So when Skull and Bones was finally released, the disconnect between what was promised in 2017 and what people actually got in 2024 was like a game that was just bare Skull and Bones. But it lost that pirate fantasy feel that worked in Black Flag because you were a captain. You steered the ship, but you could also let go of the wheel, swing across the rope, and engage in hand-to-hand combat to board an enemy vessel. In Skull and Bones, however, you are the ship. Boarding is reduced to a brief cutscene, and on-foot exploration is limited to walking around designated outposts to talk to vendors. And we have the typical live service grind. Instead of having strong narrative or dynamic naval warfare, the pivot to a live service model turned the game into an MMORPG grindfest. A lot of the content is spent harvesting resources by playing events from the ships rather than engaging in piracy. And despite an 11-year development cycle, the gameplay lacked the depth that was present in Black Flag, that was released over a decade earlier, and lacked the robust crew management and chaotic sandbox elements of its closest competitor, Sea of Thieves. But even though Skull and Bones gameplay is underwhelming and lackluster, visually it is undeniably a gorgeous game. The water looks spectacular. The Indian Ocean feels physically alive. That gives a realistic look and effect to your ship. And admittedly, every vessel is rendered with meticulous historical care. You could see the tension in the rigging, the splintering wear on the wood, and the intricate customization options that makes the ship feel lived in and personalized. And the game also nails the auditory and thematic vibes. Like, it is very immersive. The audio design carries the immersion. The straining creak of the mats, the deafening crack of broadside cannons, and your crew spontaneously belting out sea shanties over the crashing waves creates a perfect soundscape. But then, the game did give me a bit of a whiplash. So when you step ashore, the illusion of the graphics was immediately shattered, crushed, ruined, whatever word you want to use. Controlling your character on land felt stiff. The movement was clunky, animations feel and look dated, and navigating ports quickly turned into a chore. There was no swimming, no exploring anything really. The land hubs effectively served as a menu for crafting and trading and quest giving and fixing your ship. And I think that's the biggest thing that turned people away from this game. The fact that it was supposed to be a successor of Black Flag ruins the feel for this game. After the tutorial, it became so clear that this is strictly a ship-to-ship combat game. It wasn't a pirate adventure game or anything like that. There was no hand-to-hand combat. There was not even running a ship with your friends. And like most Ubisoft games that are open world, there's an incredibly rigid cycle. You accept quests, you go to destination of the quest, you fight enemies to complete the quest, you collect loot from the enemies, you upgrade gear, and you repeat this over and over and over again. And you could copy and paste that to any Ubisoft live service game. I guess not Rainbow Six Siege, but you get the point. This is the formula for most RPG games, and that's fair. And as consumers, people still like it. But there is a caveat to that. The gameplay needs to be fun, it needs to be engaging, and each interaction needs to feel different. Because if it doesn't, players will end up feeling like it's a mind-numbing grind. And unfortunately for Skull and Bones, the weakest aspect of it is the combat that is one-dimensional. So that grind becomes really boring, really quick. Going into Skull and Bones, I was expecting to play a pirate RPG, but online. Instead, what I got was a pirate ship simulator with the worst parts of MMOs, the grind. It's so frustrating to see a game with more than enough resources turned out so underwhelming, while a game like Windrose actually delivers with way less. And then you have a game like Sea of Thieves, showing you how people would like playing pirate-themed games. But ultimately, Skull and Bones is the prime example of how an immense budget and forced release cannot compensate for the lack of a cohesive, unified design vision. It was a game everybody wanted in 2017. By the time it arrived in 2024, it became a Frankenstein that didn't deliver on anything other than its good looks. But let me know what you think. Have you played Skull and Bones? Did you enjoy it? What do you like about Skull and Bones if you enjoyed it? Let me know down in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.